Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Kane blindsided, Nick and Adam's truce, Lily vs. Holden. Holden Novak will be grilled by Lily Winters. A ceasefire is agreed upon by Adam Newman and Nick Newman in order to support their family. Additionally, Kane Ashby is reversed by Victor Newman. Let's discuss the upcoming events in the CBS soap opera as you continue reading. The Will of Lily Winters. First, let's talk about Lily, who is adamant on learning what Kane is up to. To talk about a few things, the woman went to see her ex-husband. Lily wanted to negotiate and learn more about Kane's ultimate objective. But in the end, Lily lost it on Kane because she was unable to control her emotions. Not only was there no agreement, but Kane's relationship with his kids seemed to have soured. Read more. Discover the events of Y&R's most recent episode. Novak, Holden grilled. When Holden attempted to contact Kane about a fictitious employment opportunity, Lily confronted him. Supporters are aware that Holden has returned to work for Kane. The young man was actually provided with a list of individuals to connect with. Holden had already dealt with Claire Grace Newman, one of those names. Holden spoke with Claire, Daniel Romalotti, Jr., and Tessa Porter more recently. Lily will likely question Holden about Kane after that. Holden may feel guilty, but he won't be able to tell her much. However, I'm curious if Lily will use Damian Kane to coerce Holden into assisting her. Ultimately, Kane lacked the grace to inform Holden of Damian's passing. Someone Holden didn't even know had to break the news to him. The truce of Nick Newman. Nick and Adam will agree to a ceasefire, according to Monday, August 25 spoilers for The Young and the Restless. Adam seems to be signing a lot of peace accords these days. First with Amelia Heinley's character, Victoria Newman, and now with Nick. It is undoubtedly true that in order to defeat a greater threat, individuals must band together. Kane is that threat at the moment. Check out these spoilers for The Young and the Restless. Is Audra being drawn towards Kyle by fate after being backed into a corner? Additionally, it is hinted that Victor will somehow turn the tables on Kane in the upcoming episode. Could the young tycoon throw Victor another curveball instead of scaring him away? Keep an eye out because it looks like everything is ready to blow up. Kane Ashby never saw it coming, at least not the way Victor Newman had orchestrated the perfect reversal that left him both blindsided and scrambling for footing, while at the same time Nick Newman and Adam Newman found themselves caught in a rare moment of clarity that pushed them toward a fragile truce. One that neither truly trusted but both knew was necessary to keep their family from shattering under the weight of external threats, and all the while, Lily Winters was digging her heels deeper into her battle with Holden Novak, a young man whose loyalty seemed fractured between Kane's manipulations and his own moral compass, because Lily, having already burned through years of patience with Kane and finally learning to stand tall in her own right, had no intention of letting Holden slip through the cracks without answering for the choices he had made, whether those choices were coerced or self-inflicted, and so she confronted him with the determination of a woman who had fought too many battles to be dismissed, cornering him with questions about his ties to Kane, about the mysterious employment arrangement that conveniently placed him in contact with figures like Claire Grace Newman, Daniel Romalotti, Jr., and Tessa Porter, all people who somehow seemed to orbit the core storm that Kane was whipping up around Genoa City, and Holden, who was never particularly skilled at lying under pressure, began to show signs of guilt even as he tried to maintain his composure, his eyes darting, his voice faltering, and his explanations crumbling as Lily pressed harder, her sharp instincts telling her that whatever Kane was up to, Holden knew more than he was letting on, and though Holden wanted desperately to protect himself, he couldn't ignore the sting of betrayal he felt when he discovered through someone else, not Kane, that Damian Kane, the very person whose name carried weight and shadow in this entire tangled mess, had died, and Holden, confused, angry, and resentful, realized that Kane hadn't even respected him enough to share that devastating truth. So when Lily suggested that perhaps Damian's memory and the unresolved wreckage of his life could be the key to pushing Holden toward the light, there was a moment where Holden's defenses cracked, and Lily saw it, saw the hesitation, saw the possibility of turning him into an ally, even if only temporarily, because she knew that Kane's empire, built on secrecy and half-truths, could only crumble if one of his pawns decided to step off the board and expose the strategy, and yet at the same time, Cain himself was grappling with an entirely different kind of betrayal, because Victor Newman had a way of flipping the game when people least expected it. And this time Cain was the one being played, reversed so swiftly that his confidence wavered, his carefully laid plans shaken, and the sense of control he had always clung to beginning to slip from his hands, which set up the perfect stage for Nick and Adam Newman's unlikely alliance, because while the two brothers rarely agreed on anything, they both understood that when a larger storm threatened to consume everything they had fought to protect, family had to come first, and so Adam, who was no stranger to burning bridges and rebuilding them when necessary, extended an uneasy olive branch, while Nick, ever cautious but also pragmatic, chose to accept it, knowing that their father's machinations, their sister's vulnerabilities, and Cain's looming shadow meant that divided they were weak but united they at least had a chance to weather what was coming. And so as Monday, August 25th approached, the undercurrent of tension in Genoa City grew heavier, with Victor sharpening his knives in silence, Cain preparing for counterattacks even as he stumbled from being blindsided, Lily pushing Holden to the breaking point of loyalty, and Nick and Adam discovering that perhaps survival required them to stop fighting each other long enough to fight side by side, even if neither trusted the other to hold the line when it mattered most, because trust in Genoa City was always fleeting, always conditional, always one revelation away from destruction, and while the truce might have bought the Newman brothers time, it also sent ripples of unease across the entire family, especially as Victoria, Nikki, and even Claire began to sense that the fragile alliances forming around them could just as easily shatter. But, for now, what mattered most was that Victor had turned the tables on Cain, and Cain, who prided himself on never being caught unaware, had been blindsided in a way that forced him to question not just his strategies but also the very people he had pulled into his orbit, leaving everyone else bracing for the explosion that was sure to come, because in Genoa City, nothing stayed buried, no truce lasted forever, and no one, least of all Cain Ashby, was safe when Victor Newman decided to strike. The ripple effects of Victor Newman's maneuver against Cain Ashby didn't stop at the blindsiding twist that left Cain staggering. Instead, they spread across Genoa City like wildfire, igniting tensions in every corner of the Newman, Ashby, and Winter's orbits, because in Victor's world, one strike was never just a strike. It was the opening move of a much larger war, and Cain, who had always thought himself cunning enough to play with sharks, suddenly found himself surrounded by predators who smelled blood, and as he reeled from Victor's reversal, he began lashing out in private moments, calling Holden Novak, demanding loyalty, demanding silence, yet Holden, after Lily's relentless grilling, was no longer so sure he wanted to remain in Cain's pocket, because Lily had touched a raw nerve by reminding him of Damien Cain's death, a death that Holden hadn't been prepared to process, and worse, a death that Cain had hidden from him, which left Holden asking himself whether he was just another pawn, another expendable tool in Cain's growing empire, and Holden, who had been raised to value loyalty but also to fear betrayal, suddenly realized that his place in Cain's web came with strings too heavy to bear. But he wasn't the only one asking hard questions. Lily herself had gone home after her showdown with Holden, pacing, furious, her emotions torn between grief over what her children were enduring, anger over Cain's manipulation, and confusion over whether Holden was a victim or a willing participant, and she began to wonder whether turning Holden could truly bring Cain down, or whether doing so would simply add another layer of guilt to her already heavy heart, because Lily had fought so hard for peace in her life, for stability after years of turbulence, yet here she was again, dragged into Cain's chaos, and she vowed that this time she wouldn't let him win, not as a partner, not as a father, not as a manipulator. She would outmaneuver him, and Holden would either help her or be crushed with him. Meanwhile, Nick and Adam, still sitting in uneasy silence after agreeing to their truce, realized just how strange it was to be on the same side, because Nick still looked at Adam and saw the brother who had betrayed, manipulated, and lied too many times to count, and Adam still looked at Nick and saw the golden boy who had always had Victor's approval even when he didn't deserve it, but both of them, deep down, knew that Cain's moves were bigger than their petty resentments, that Victor's shadow loomed larger than their individual grudges, and that their mother, their sister, and their children all stood to suffer if they allowed Cain's machinations to spiral unchecked. So they agreed, reluctantly, warily, but genuinely, to hold their fire against each other until the storm passed, though neither promised what would happen after, because a Newman truce was never permanent, only a ceasefire. and both knew that at the first sign of weakness, the old rivalries would flare again. But Victor, watching all of this from the sidelines, played his cards with a smile, because he knew that by blindsiding Kane, by forcing Nick and Adam to lean on each other, and by quietly guiding Lily toward Holden, he was orchestrating not just one victory but several, weaving a chessboard that only he could see. And yet, even Victor underestimated how dangerous Kane could be when cornered, because Kane, blindsided or not, was still a man who thrived in chaos, and chaos was where he did his best work. In the quiet of his office, Kane poured a drink, stared at his reflection, and whispered to himself that he wasn't beaten, not yet, not ever. And if Victor thought he could corner him, he was mistaken, because Kane had survived worse, and he would survive this too, even if it meant burning every bridge in Genoa City to the ground. Holden, meanwhile, wrestled with the truth Lily had forced into his ears, unable to shake the image of Damien Kane, a man he'd barely known but whose name hung like a curse over his life, and Holden began to think about his future, about whether standing beside Kane meant inheriting not just power but also a legacy of deceit, and the thought made him sick, which was exactly what Lily wanted, for Holden to feel the weight of his choices, for him to see Kane not as a savior but as a destroyer. And she plotted her next move carefully, considering whether to approach him again with a softer tone, or whether to push harder until he cracked. But Lily knew one thing for certain. She was done playing by Kane's rules. Elsewhere in town, whispers about Nick and Adam's truce began to spread, with Victoria suspicious, Nikki cautiously supportive, and even Sharon privately wondering what it meant for the family dynamic, because Sharon had always believed that Nick and Adam, for all their differences, were two sides of the same coin, and if they could ever truly unite, they might actually be unstoppable, though she also feared what that kind of power might unleash, especially if their unity was built on shaky ground. And as the hours ticked down toward August 25th, the city buzzed with nervous anticipation, because everyone knew that Victor wasn't done, that Kane wasn't out, that Lily wasn't backing down, and that Nick and Adam's truce was just the calm before the next storm. And in Genoa City, storms never blew over quietly. They always erupted with thunder, lightning, and devastation that left everyone scrambling to pick up the pieces. Kane Ashby sat in the dim light of his office, the blinds half-drawn like prison bars slicing shadows across his face, and though he had been blindsided by Victor Newman's ruthless reversal, the shock was starting to settle into something far more dangerous, resolve, because Kane was not a man who admitted defeat, and certainly not a man who let someone like Victor Newman define his fate. So with every passing second, his brain churned with ideas, strategies, and countermeasures, each more desperate than the last. But Kane knew that desperation was a weapon too, one he could use to unsettle his enemies, and as he poured himself another drink, he whispered promises to himself that this was not the end, that the Newmans would regret underestimating him, and that even Lily, the woman who had once been his compass, would regret standing against him. Now, at the same time, Lily Winters was pacing the floor of her apartment, unable to let go of the firestorm Kane had created in her life once again, and her frustration with Holden Novak gnawed at her because she knew the young man held more answers than he admitted, and though she had cracked him slightly by confronting him with Damien's death, she also sensed that Holden was on the edge of making a choice that would either redeem him or condemn him, so Lily began plotting ways to push him over that edge. Should she offer compassion, reminding him that he still had a chance to be better than Kane, or should she take a harsher path, leveraging Damien's memory and Holden's guilt to force his hand? And Lily, being both a businesswoman and a mother, knew that sometimes kindness worked, but other times, hard truths broke through where sympathy could not. Meanwhile, Holden himself was unraveling. He replayed Lily's words over and over in his head, the sting of learning about Damien's death from someone other than Kane piercing him deeper with every passing moment. And the realization that Kane had used him, kept him in the dark, and treated him as just another disposable pawn began to rot away at his loyalty, and Holden found himself staring at his phone, fingers hovering, tempted to call Lily, to tell her everything he knew, to switch sides, before it was too late. But fear stopped him, fear of Kane's wrath, fear of being exposed, fear of betraying the only man who had ever taken a chance on him, even if that man had betrayed him in return. Elsewhere, Nick and Adam Newman sat in Victor's office, the silence between them thick and heavy, because their truce, fragile as it was, didn't erase years of resentment. But as Victor laid out his expectations, both brothers realized the truth. They were not simply agreeing to tolerate each other, they were being forced to work as a unit, as soldiers in Victor's war. And while Nick bristled at the idea of being treated like a pawn in his father's game, Adam accepted it with a smirk, because, in Adam's mind, being underestimated was always the best position. It gave him room to maneuver, to strike when no one was looking, and Adam quietly vowed that while he might cooperate for now, he would make sure he came out of this truce with more power than when he entered it. But Victor, ever the puppet master, watched both his sons with the confidence of a man who had orchestrated countless wars, and he knew that while Cain was dangerous, Cain was also predictable when emotional, and Victor was counting on Cain's pride, his arrogance, his refusal to accept defeat, because men like Cain always made mistakes when they were cornered, and Victor intended to exploit those mistakes until Cain was finished. Yet what Victor didn't anticipate was the firestorm brewing in Lily's heart, because Lily, unlike Nick or Adam, wasn't looking to play the long game. She was looking for immediate justice, for resolution, and she was ready to push Holden Novak harder than she ever had, which meant the balance of power in Genoa City was about to shift in unpredictable ways. On August 25th, when the episode unfolded, Cain struck first. Blindsided or not, he refused to crawl, so he made a calculated move to reassert control, reaching out to a quiet contact in the financial world, someone who owed him favors from his father Colin Atkinson's old schemes, and Cain set into motion a plan that would put pressure on Newman Enterprises, a financial squeeze designed to make Victor react, because Cain understood that sometimes the best way to destabilize an empire was not through brute force but by hitting its foundation, money, influence, trust. As Cain plotted, Lily pressed Holden again, this time with a surprising twist of compassion, inviting him into her office under the pretense of discussing business. But when Holden arrived, nervous and defensive, Lily softened her tone, speaking of Damien not as a weapon but as a person, as someone whose life had mattered, whose choices had rippled through others. And Lily gently asked Holden whether he wanted Damien's legacy to be one of pain or of redemption. And for the first time, Holden cracked wide open, admitting that he wasn't sure he could keep protecting Cain, that he was tired of carrying secrets he didn't understand, that he wanted out. But before he could say more, his phone buzzed, and Cain's name lit up the screen, pulling him back into fear, into silence, and Holden fled Lily's office before revealing anything concrete, leaving her more determined than ever to break him completely. Meanwhile, Nick and Adam continued their reluctant cooperation, investigating Cain's movements at Victor's request, and in doing so, they discovered fragments of his financial plays, breadcrumbs leading toward a larger scheme, but the brothers disagreed on how to handle it. Nick wanted transparency, to bring everything into the open, while Adam preferred subtlety, using the information to manipulate Cain quietly until he trapped himself. And though they argued, neither was willing to risk breaking the truce, so they agreed to split responsibilities, Nick taking the straightforward path and Adam the underhanded, each secretly believing his way would be the one to expose Cain once and for all. And through it all, Victor's calm smile never wavered, because for him, every move made by Cain, Lily, Holden, Nick, and Adam was part of the same chessboard, and Victor, as always, intended to be the one who called checkmate in the end. Cain Ashby's plan to destabilize Newman Enterprises was not merely about money, it was about sending a message. By tapping into old networks his father Colin had once exploited, Cain managed to funnel misinformation into the markets, creating the illusion that Newman was facing instability in one of its subsidiaries. Stocks wavered, whispers spread, and Victor, though calm on the surface, felt the irritation of a man who despised being played at his own game. Yet instead of striking back immediately, Victor waited, letting Cain believe his scheme was working, because patience was always Victor's deadliest weapon. Nick, alarmed by the market's reaction, urged immediate action, arguing that the family's reputation was at stake, while Adam smirked, noting that sometimes letting a man think his winning was the fastest way to corner him. Their disagreement nearly shattered their truce on the spot, but Victor's heavy hand forced them back into line. They would wait, they would watch, and when Cain overplayed his hand, they would strike.